We are going to begin today on our 10-minute painting of our African landscape here with a large square-headed brush from Artist's Loft and a mixture of paint that will render orange. My mix here is using a primary red, a primary yellow, and a little bit of titanium white. Once that's applied, I'm removing the titanium white from the mixture and I'm getting more of a pure orange and applying that around the outskirts of my brighter mix. I'm still using the square-headed brush and I'm blending the two together very softly. And I'm doing so by applying the paint and mixing the paint with a very, very subtle touch. The softer your brush application, the more subtle and less streaky of an effect your render. So I'm just kind of continuing moving my orange upwards, and if you're having an issue blending, you can simply add a little bit of water. It'll help make the paint remain wet longer, and you'll be able to drag it out farther to help with your blends. I'm then taking some burnt umber and applying it to the top left-hand corner of my painting, and yet again blending it out very, very softly. We're trying to render a very smooth gradient, void of any stark strokes or brushwork. While that can be incredibly beautiful in some pieces, I thought today I'd show you how to create something very soft and have something that has a lot of nice transitions. I'm then going back down to the bottom near the horizon, taking a titanium white and primary yellow and just brightening up where I know I want my sun to be, where I want all of the light to be emanating from. This is very easy if the background is still wet. However, if it isn't, again, we can just add water to ensure that this mixture has a nice feathered gradient of an edge that will really make it all work cohesively. I'm then taking the same colors that I used in the sky, such as a burnt umber, our mixed orange, and our mixed yellow, and I'm applying that down in the water. I'm doing this all in horizontal strokes. However, I'm not really going to do a lot to make it look like water just yet. I'm applying this base layer, which we will be returning to a little bit later. In the meantime, I'm going to apply clouds to our sky. And I'm going to do so using a titanium white with our small round-headed brush. You could also use a liner brush, but essentially what we're attempting to do here is I create a line, and it's not a perfectly straight line. It has bumps and curves, as clouds do, and then I'm blending the top words upwards. I'm blending the top upwards. I'm sorry, it's a little bit late. But I'm keeping the bottom portion of the cloud fairly sharp and a little bit brighter. If your background is still wet, this will be a fairly easy process. However, again, if your background is dry and you need help with the blending, you can add a little bit of water and it'll help feather the edges upwards and help it blend in with the rest of the painting. I'm also trying to connect a couple of the clouds, and as you'll notice, the clouds aren't all sitting horizontally perfectly in the sky. They kind of edge upwards from the bottom right-hand corner, and they have this movement to them. That's to make the painting a little bit more dynamic and draw the viewer's eye towards the tree which we have in the background, the main visual portion of the painting. And that's really important when you're painting something that doesn't really have that many subjects in it. You want to lead the eye to the really important portions of it. And you can do that through clouds and that sort of thing as well. So I'm just going back and I'm adding additional portions of white, connecting more clouds. And really, the more of this you do, the more interesting it will look. Again, avoid straight lines, avoid horizontal lines, and just ensure that the bottom of the majority of your clouds are fairly sharp, while the tops are feathered upwards. I'm then taking a pure titanium white and attempting to make a sun. However, the paint is still fairly wet, so we might have to wait for that to dry a little bit. In the meantime, I'm taking white, I'm applying it to the water in horizontal strokes in the same way that the light will be reflecting down in the water itself. So as you can see, it's nice and bright. While we wait for the sky to dry to apply the sun, I'm going to be taking my small round-headed brush or liner brush and applying our tree. I'm doing this with a pure black pigment as this is going to be a silhouetted effect. And I've already drawn in my tree, but the idea here with these African style looking trees is that the base and the main 2 or 3 limbs are fairly isolated. They don't have a lot branching off from them. However, once you get to the tip of them, they branch off in a litany of different directions. So as you can see, again, the main branches fairly isolated. The tops of them, however, cluttered. And you want the tops to go off in varying directions, and we'll add the foliage, which will make it look a lot more natural, but we need to build this foundation first. If you're having issues creating very small, sharp looking branches, which are important, you can just add additional water to your brush and it will help with the process very significantly. As you can tell, the bottom of the tree is also much larger than the top portions. It's really important that as your tree progresses upwards, the branches get smaller and smaller and smaller. Your branches should also intertwine in varying portions, as it's not a two-dimensional thing. There are going to be some branches in front of one another, crossing paths and that sort of thing. So make sure that you implement that in your painting as well. Here I'm just creating some additional pieces, and for those curious, I used a Sharpie to draw on the tree so that when I painted the sky, I could still see the outline, the sketch, over it. It just made the process a little bit easier. But make sure if you're using a fairly wet marker that it is fully dry by the time you apply the paint, otherwise they can blend and you can render a kind of muddy, dirty aesthetic. So just keep that in mind. Ensure that it is completely dry before you go and apply paint over top something like a Sharpie. I'm then taking an old square-headed brush with bristles that kind of leaf off in this plethora of different directions, and using a dabbing motion, I'm applying just so many little implications of leaves. It really makes the time fly by. You don't have to do leaf after leaf after leaf. It creates them for you, and it is fantastic for this type of work. I'm also going down and applying it in the grass, or perhaps this is a line of very distant trees as well. It's really up to the viewer's interpretation, but it keeps it kind of ambiguous and fun. I'm applying this black very dark at the edges. However, when we get closer to the light area, I'm applying it less pressure with the brush, which is getting something that's going to be a little bit brighter, and it's going to look as if the light is affecting it as well, which means that it is going to be cohesive within the rest of our painting. Now that our sky's dried a good amount, I'm going back in and I'm applying a very light titanium white where I want our sun to be in the painting. We are now going to let the painting dry and then come back to it once the black is fully finished. I'm now going back into the painting here with a very small liner brush or small round-headed brush, a good amount of water, and a similar mixture of a color that we used in the sky. And I'm creating a line between our foliage and our reflection of the foliage. I'm essentially cutting it right in half, and I'm doing it with a number of strokes. This is the water that is separating it, and I'm also taking these horizontal strokes and moving them downwards into the rest of our water. This is really important as it's going to add a lot of added detail. It's going to make our water look much more like water, and it's going to make it much more interesting. I'm then adding additional white and yellow to the center areas, or rather where the light is going to be hitting, and I'm just adding that extra little detail that's really going to help make that portion of the painting pop. Now we have a couple of extra seconds, so I thought I'd throw in a couple of extra clouds, because again, the clouds are really going to help draw the eye towards where we want it to be, and make the painting fairly interesting. So now we're just using more water and titanium white to connect additional clouds. It's a very easy process, it's a very cathartic process, and it adds to the painting. And there is our final 10-minute painting. This one really was a joy to do. If you're new to acrylic painting and you'd like to learn more, there is a link in the description to my book, Acrylics for Beginners. And of course, I post every Saturday. I hope to see you next Saturday. Thank you so much for watching, and above all, stay creative.